POS 324 Issues in International Politics. Study Session 1 Modern Theoretical Approaches to International Politics. Introduction. This study session opens a discussion on the course. We will start the session by examining the difference between international relations and international politics. Thereafter, various theories used in the study of international politics will be fully analyzed. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this study session, you should be able to distinguish between international relations and international politics. Discuss the modern theoretical approaches to the study of international politics, and explain the various arguments put in place by different scholars in their support for a particular theory. Differences between international relations and international politics. International relations is the study and practice of political relationships among the world's nations, especially their governments. Diplomacy is the management of communication and relationships between nations. International relations and international politics are often used interchangeably. For the purpose of this course, a brief distinction between the two will be relevant, even though we can consciously or unconsciously use the two terms in some of our writings. International relations is a term properly embracing the totality of the relations among peoples and groups in the world society. On the other hand, international politics is the study of the international community in a rather narrow sense, which centers on diplomacy and the relations among states and other political units. From this clarification, it can be said that international relations is broader in meaning and scope than international politics. Theoretical approaches to international politics. Social scientists construct different theories to make international events understandable. In this context, the theories that guide the thinking of policymakers and the scholars in different historical circumstances tell us much about international politics itself. However, the two dominant theoretical approaches to the study of international politics are realism and liberalism. The disagreement between realists and liberals about the nature of international politics is perhaps the most fundamental division in all political discourse. The two schools of thought disagree over the very nature of international politics. Realism. Realism, as applied to contemporary international politics, view the state, which should answer to no higher political authority, as the most important actor on the world stage. For the realists, conflicts of interest among states are assumed to be inevitable. Realism also emphasizes the ways in which the anarchical nature of international politics dictates the choices that foreign policy makers, as rational problem solvers who must calculate their interests in terms of power, must take. Realists contend that struggles between states to secure their frequently conflicting national interests are the main actions on the world stage. Realists argue that wars arise from the efforts of states to acquire power and security in an anarchic world, or one in which there is no ultimate arbiter of order, other than self-help and the force of arms. In this view, power transitions, disequilibrium in the balance of power, and competition over allies, territory, and other power resources are the root causes of war. Also, security dilemmas arise when states try to promote their own security through arms buildup, creation of alliances, or efforts to acquire buffer states. This causes other states to feel insecure, leading to arms races and competition over strategic territory and resources. Given the realist view of politics as a struggle of power, they maintain that countries should and usually do base their foreign policy on the existence of what realists see as a Darwinian country eats country world, in which power is the key to national survival of the fittest. As Sterling Fokker argues, in an environment as dangerous as anarchy, those who ignore realist principles will ultimately not survive. Hint: realists contend that struggles between states to secure their frequently conflicting national interests are the main actions on the world stage. Realists argue that wars arise from the efforts of states to acquire power and security in an anarchic world, or one in which there is no ultimate arbiter of order other than self-help and the force of arms. To the hardcore realists, respect for moral principles is a wasteful and dangerous interference in the rational pursuit of national self-advantage. To this proponent of power politics, questions about the relative virtues of the values within this or that ideological or religious system cannot be allowed to interfere with sound policy making. A state's philosophical or ethical preferences are neither good nor bad. What matters is whether they serve its self-interests. Thus, the game of international politics revolves around the pursuit of power, acquiring it, increasing it, projecting it, and using it to bend others to one's will. At the core extreme, realism appears to accept war as normal and rejects morality as it pertains to relations between individuals. Tip: the game of international politics revolves around the pursuit of power, acquiring it, increasing it, projecting it, and using it to bend others to one's will. At the core extreme, realism appears to accept war as normal and reject morality as it pertains to relations between individuals. However, the only area where realist theorists depart from one another somewhat is on the question of how the dictates of power are applied to policy. Classic realists see power translated through the decisions of national leaders. As such, these realists do not believe that countries necessarily follow the dictates of power. Instead, they believe that decision makers can and do err by allowing morality, ideology, or anything else other than power realities to govern foreign policy. By contrast, non-realists pay little attention to the internal policy making in countries. Reflection: the central thesis of the realists is that international politics can be best explained by the choices of states operating as autonomous actors, rationally pursuing their own interests in an international system of sovereign states without a central authority. This is because non-realists believe that countries are rational actors and therefore will react similarly and predictably to power realities in a given situation, no matter who is in office. Because non-realists see states reacting predictably to power, these theorists are interested in ascertaining rules about how states will react in a given set of circumstances. With respect to justice and morality, the realist scholars Hans Morgenthau reasoned that it is unconscionable for a state to follow policy based on such principles. He argued that while the individual has a moral right to sacrifice himself in defense of an abstract principle, the state has no right to let its moral disapprobation get in the way of successful political action, itself inspired by the moral principle of national survival. This is according to Morgenthau, 1986, page 38. The central thesis of the realists is that international politics can be best explained by the choices of states operating as autonomous actors, rationally pursuing their own interests in an international system of sovereign states without any central authority. Liberalism. Liberal theories of international politics try to explain how peace and cooperation are possible. Liberals reject the notion that all or most humans are inherently political predators. Instead, liberals believe that humans and their countries are capable of achieving more cooperative, less conflictive relations, either through new models of governance. At the core of liberalism is an emphasis on the impact that ideas have on behavior, the quality, dignity, and liberty of the individuals, and the need to protect people from excessive state regulation. Liberalism views individuals as the seat of moral value and virtue and asserts that people should be treated as ends rather than means. It emphasizes ethical principles over the pursuit of power and institutions, over capabilities as forces shaping interstate relations, and it defines politics at the international level more as a struggle for consensus than a struggle for power and prestige. Hint: at the core of liberalism is an emphasis on the impact that ideas have on behavior, the equality, dignity, and liberty of individuals, and the need to protect people from excessive state regulation. Liberalism views individuals as the seat of moral value and virtue and asserts that people should be treated as ends rather than means. The basic argument put forward by advocates of liberalism is that conflicts and their prevention are determined not only by the balance of power, but by the domestic structures of states, their values, identities and cultures, and international institutions for conflict resolution. Advocates of liberalism were inspired by the interests of ideals after World War One. They were sometimes referred to as advocates of idealism, even though they were a diverse group within a larger liberal traditions. Post-World War One idealism, as argued by such scholars and policymakers as Alfred Zimmerman, Norman Angell, James T. Shotwell, and Woodrow Wilson, was derived from ancient liberal philosophy and has been interpreted variously in different periods. These idealists drew their philosophy from such liberal thinkers as Immanuel Kant, John Stuart Mills, David Hume, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. This is according to Doyle in 1997 and Zaka and Matthew 1995. Note: liberalists do not believe that acquiring, preserving, and applying power must be, or even always is, the essence of international relations. Instead, liberals argue foreign policy should be and sometimes is formulated according to cooperative and ethical standards. In the same view, liberals believe that humanity can and must successfully seek a new system based on sovereignty, but they now argue that it is imperative to find new organizational paths to cooperation. Furthermore, liberals are convinced that the spread of nuclear weapons, the increase in economic interdependence among countries, the decline of world resources, the daunting gap between rich and poor, and the mounting damage to our ecosphere means that humans must learn to cooperate more fully because they are in grave danger of suffering a catastrophe of unparalleled proportions. This is according to Rook in 2006. Thus, instead of an anarchic international system, there are plenty of opportunities for cooperation and broader notions of power, such as cultural capital, for example, the influence of films leading to popularity of the country's culture and creating a market for its exports worldwide. This can also mean that absolute gains can be made through cooperation and interdependence. Thus, peace can be achieved. Although not all liberals subscribed to the principles associated with liberalism, they however shared a moralistic, optimistic, and universalistic image of international affairs. They believe it is possible to replace competitive states with a global community regulated by institutions for global governance. This is according to Kegley in 2007. However, a new version of the theory is known as neoliberalism. Neoliberalism argues that international institutions can allow nations to successfully cooperate in the international system. For these neoliberals, reciprocity can be an effective strategy for achieving cooperation in a situation of conflicting interests. Neoliberals study historical and contemporary cases in international relations to see how institutions and norms affect the possibility for overcoming dilemmas and achieving international cooperation. Thus, for neoliberals, the emergence of international institutions is key to understanding how states achieve a superior rational outcome that includes long-term self-interest and not just immediate self-interest. This is according to Goldstein and Peavehouse in 2011. Hint: a theory is a set of facts, propositions, or principles analyzed in their relation to one another and used to explain a phenomenon. Reflection: although not all liberals subscribed to principles associated with liberalism, they however shared a moralistic, optimistic, and universalistic image of international affairs. They believe it is possible to replace competitive states with a global community regulated by institutions for global governance. It is imperative to note that scholars have used liberalism to analyze democracy within the context of peace. The democratic peace theory argues that liberal democracies have never or almost never made war on one another and have fewer conflicts amongst themselves. This is seen as contradicting especially the realist theories, and this empirical claim is now one of the great disputes in political science. Limitations of realism and liberalism. It has been observed that both realism and liberalism as a school of thought are inadequate to explain patterns in international politics. The realist emphasis on balance of power is necessary but not sufficient when long-term societal changes are eroding the norms of state sovereignty. In addition, a growing number of critics also pointed out that realism did not account for significant new developments in world politics. For instance, it could not explain the creation of new liberal trade and political institutions in Western Europe in the 1950s and 1960s, where the corporate pursuit of mutual advantage rather than narrow self-interest appeared to dominate, at least in economic if not always in military affairs. Other critics began to worry about realism's tendency to disregard ethical principles and about the material and social costs that some of the policy prescriptions seem to impose, such as retarded economic growth resulting from unrestrained military expenditures. This is according to Kegley in 2007. In the same view, it is said that realist theory, as the dominant paradigm of the Cold War era, based on the struggle for power between the United States and the Soviet Union, does not adequately account for the collapse of the Soviet Union and the withdrawal of the Soviet military forces from Central Europe without a shot having been fired. Note: realism did not account for significant new developments in world politics. For instance, it could not explain the creation of new liberal trade and political institutions in Western Europe in the 1950s and 1960s, where the corporate pursuit of mutual advantage rather than the narrow self-interest appeared to dominate. Similarly, the liberal view that peace has broken out among major liberal democracies is accurate, but it is not a solution when many states, including great powers, are not liberal democracies. However, the realist liberal approach is wrapped in abstraction, as both schools of thought do not have validity on the study of international politics. As Frankel rightly observed, the pursuit of limited national objectives, the separation of foreign policy from domestic policy, the conduct of secret diplomacy, the use of balance of power as a technique for the management of power, and the pleas for nations to place lesser emphasis on ideology as a condition of international conduct have little or no relevance in the contemporary international system. This is according to Frankel in 1973. The type of change that realism and liberalism can lead to is only piecemeal change or reform. It is not radical change because it leaves the root of the world situation unaffected. In this sense of the word, realism and liberalism are not transformation theories, and because they leave the basic constituents of the world situation intact, one is justified in calling them conservative theories. Despite these limitations, both realism and liberalism share one feature, namely that both of them take the explanation of international reality as the most important function of theory. Thus, both theories can help students of international politics to address the international, domestic, and institutional dimensions of conflict. Study session summary. In this study session, we discussed the difference between international relations and international politics, which are often used interchangeably. However, international relations is broader in meaning than international politics. There are two major theoretical interpretations of international politics. The first is the realists, which view the state as the most important actor on the world stage. For the realists, the emphasis on power became significant in the operation of world politics. The second is liberalism, which laid emphasis on idealism, that is, the use of morality in the conduct of international politics. For the liberals, foreign policy should be and sometimes is formulated according to ethical standards and cooperation. Both theories are constrained and wrapped in abstraction as they have no validity in the study of international politics. End of study session 1. Thanks for listening.